personal GoFundMe campaign, we managed to pay for over 2,700 nights of accommodation and over 8,000 hot meals that we served to Ukrainians. But that's a drop in the as there are studio Krushatik, and for those who don't know, Krushatik is the main drag feeding into down, of course, that's often the backdrop for seeing these days. We had curated exhibitions of their art in New York, for Art New York, and also for Stoke, New York, and Art Toronto, and their own gallery. Those were different times. It was lighter fare, with names such as Allegories of Love as a nomenclature for the exhibitions that we were putting on. From Krushatik, the Zhuravel saw firsthand the uprising in 2014, the brutal response from the Yanukovych regime, the toppling of that government, and the ensuing Russian invasion. As Mykola absorbed what was happening, he concluded in 2014 that this wasn't the end of something, but it was the beginning of something that ultimately Putin intended to take action and take Ukraine as a whole. He developed a multimedia exhibition of art, sculpture, photography, and videography. Darius stepped in as the videographer and photographer. The works are both graphic and symbolic, as some of you have already had an opportunity to view. But they're meant to depict what it is to be a middle power, subjected to the machinations of a self-declared superpower, bent on reclaiming past and with this quotes, glory, unquote. There was some irony in our August meeting as we sat on the balcony overlooking Krushatik. There was a military parade in full force because it was just before Ukrainian Independence Day and practice run was happening as we were leaving. So the tanks were rolling, the armed carriers were rolling, missiles were on display, and police were flying overhead. We met again in Kyiv this past January and discussed further the Invasion Redux to Toronto. Unlike Mykola, who believed the full invasion was pending, almost everyone we spoke to in January was convinced that this was just another chapter in the soap opera, and that it was all posturing. On February 22nd, the CIA, through our work in these meetings, signed a letter and sent to people in the area that we would bring the Invasion Redux exhibition here to Toronto. With the invasion on February 24th, of course, there was a very real difference in impact to the Zhuravels and their son. When the air raid sirens started to sound, they had gone out of the back one day, and it turned out to be a 6-day trek as they made their way to the Polish border and beyond. And then, of course, with obtaining the visas, 1 month later, they managed to find a way to Toronto and be able to we're doing tonight. In addition to what was the 2016 exhibition, which that is a collection of photos. I don't know if all of you have had an opportunity to go to the very far end of our exhibition, but there it masks the trek to the border and their experience in Poland prior to making the way to Canada. And we also have a very special exhibit, and this is Daria's 2014 Ukrainian flag, class 10s. We call it United We Stand, and we also created a t-shirt depiction of this, which is available online if anybody has anything else to do for it. And there, oh yeah, sorry. Well, we've got a live model here to display. We'll spend a bit of time on the exhibition after the upcoming panel discussion and Q&A session. But we have a short video teaser that we'd like to show you first that Mykola and Daria prepared on the Invasion Redux exhibition. So we can cue it.
проект це метафора, алегорія про події, які зараз відбуваються на території України. А точніше це війна Росії проти України. Інвазія – це термін етичний, коли паразит входить в організм і розмножується і вбивається організм всередині. Тому назва дуже правильна і точна, тому що характеризує відповідну переказовську. Він має дуже специфічний погляд. Я спробував показати портрет агресора, портрет окупанта.
We'll say just a few short comments now, and then after Q&A, we'll come back more, including some very exciting new things to show.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
Добрий вечір. Громада Канади. Наші брати, наші приятелі, друзі, справжні цієї країни, цієї країни, це побачимо, я побачив більше 40 заходить дуже вдячний за першу Канаді, як країни і CNE, яка організувалася, як нас запросила, нас і я сказав, що я запрошую, я не буду зараз розповідати з тесту, ставлено тут, але я хочу декілька слів сказати про іншу тему.
Good evening, Canadian communities, our brothers and sisters from Ukraine as well. I see many countries being represented in the first place. I want to say thank you, Stacey, thank you for their support, and we start with this, and I don't want to talk too much about our team, because I want to say something else.
Я хотів розказати місія кожної людини, вона повинна відбутися, вона живе в світі, на цій землі. Я до цього їжджу дуже просто і пам'ятаю з самого початку цих конфліктів, я сказав, що 2014 рік, перша революція, перша війни, Запад, і я відчував це. Але трапилось 14 році, я створив цей проект для того, щоб цим місцевим зложників, зрозумів, що є ще битви на рівні культурних ділянках.
Everybody has their own nation, their own language, and of course, is our duty to get our destination. So I approached my mission very simply from the very beginning. And this art is my weapon. Of course, the 2014 events, 2014 revolution, it's not like war to me, and to others as well. This was my response back. This was my weapon in a cultural front.
Я створив цей проект, перше показував, і потім ми запланували ще цю війну, це ще виконавця второго, завдяки лідерам цій галереї. І мета моя була показати людям інших країн бачення цього зла, людина, яка проживає в Україні, все своє життя, знає історію, якби відчуває отак от російську імперію, царське. І отак от я хотів відповісти на те, що мене створили з 14 на Україну. Це моя була відповідь. Мій постріл, як художника.
So those that live in Ukraine, they really feel and they feel and see Russia. And this was my shot, to show the true face of how we see the aggressor.
І зроблено це України різні країни, демократичні, цивілізовані, не вірив словам Путіна, якісь миру і домовленості, а діяв рівно так, як діяла коаліція антифашистська під час Другої світової війни. Мріяли прийняли відношення і подолати цього ворога. І зараз я призиваю всіх громадян Канади, країн, не тільки Канади, а всього припинити спілкування на різних рівнях, економічному, культурному, політичному, всі країни-агресори. Не давати можливість завжди долара, цента, рубля на наших відношеннях злочинній владі, агресії Росії.
I'm glad that the other countries didn't believe the words of Putin and did create after the World War II. There was an anti-fascist coalition countries, specifically for the purposes of protecting us from somebody fascist Germany, right? And so I'm glad that they didn't believe Putin's promises of peace and so on. And I'm calling everyone not to invest culturally, economically to Russia. Don't spend any dollar on that country.
Тому я вдячний вашому питанню за те, що ви знаєте ваше завдання. І я дуже вдячний вам за те, що ви піднімаєте це питання, будете піднімати. І дай Бог, щоб ми перемогли, дай Бог вам успіхів, допомоги з вашої праці. Ваша праця важлива для нашої перемоги, взагалі просто завжди зараз відбувається, але і завдяки вам, тебе, щоб вона вирішила, щоб вона дай Бог. І слава Україні, I am very happy that
raising this has been very important. I'm glad that you heard and I'm glad that you're speaking about this because it's a very important, not just topic, but it's also a very important contribution of yours back in our fight against this aggression. So thank you so much for your support. I'm sure with our common efforts, even this will be part in our big part in our Ukraine.
And don't worry, you're going to hear from Daria. You're going to hear from Daria after the Q&A, after the panel and the Q&A. It's now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for tonight's session. That's the next instance. As soon as a partner in the area of retirement and financial machines and regulatory governance and legal governance, RGL Consulting Practices at LifeWorks. She consults, speaks, and teaches and writes international pension governance and Irish governance with over 30 years of experience. Christine manages the legal consultants and Mitch Consulting manages the RGL, a large multi-special working in over 140 wind-ups and restructurings and constructions. It has held leadership on many committees and councils in the industry and coordinates publication of the Warren Chicago Handbook of Pension and Pension. It is also vice chair of the Ontario Financial Services Tribunal, traditionally appointed in 2014 and DA from Western University, Dr. Fanny University of Toronto. I hand it over to you to take it away with distinguished panel.
Thank you, Daryl. I'm very, very honored to be here today. I do have a few announcements to make before we get started with the panel discussion. I believe that this discussion counts for 1 hour of substantive content towards Ontario's annual CPD and continuing professional development requirement. And I also thought that it would be worth mentioning that people can submit if they like to, in the exercise, there's a container for donations when CPA using agency Ukraine emergency. As well, you can scan the barcode up there. You see two t-shirts, Andy t-shirt, one of them on it, and I purchased black one. So you can scan the barcode and purchase t-shirts for this beautiful, powerful image. So we're going to have until 8 o'clock a panel discussion, time for people questions. And after the Q&A, we would ask that you stay in your seats and online for a virtual tour of the exhibits. And those online will also receive provided for some of the material here. And there will be a surprise at the end for those here in person. So stay and enjoy your refreshments and discussions and viewing afterwards. So this panel discussion is called Avoid Doing Business with the War Criminal, the Divestment Dilemma. So we're very fortunate individuals to speak on this today. We have Ambassador Bob Ray, online. Hello, Ambassador Ray. And we also have Randy Boswell. I will introduce them both. There are really two intertwined topics we're going to discuss today. The first, I would anticipate that Ambassador Ray will speak to, that is, it's in keeping with Asian art that artists have provided for us. Talking about human rights abuses, work and crimes against humanity, committed on Ukraine. And the second topic connected to that I'm expecting that Randy will be able to speak to that, possible responses to these actions by corporations, by charities, financial institutional and pension funds. So let me introduce our two speakers. The Honorable Bob is the ambassador and permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations. He served as Premier from 1990 to 1995, interim leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, 2011 to 2013, and was appointed as Canada's special Myanmar in 2017, and Canada's special envoy on humanitarian and issues in 2020. Mr. Ray taught law and public policy at the University of Toronto, and was a partner and senior counsel to the law firm OKT LLP, specializing in business law and constitutional issues. Bob Ray is a privy counsel, a companion of the Order of Canada, member of the Order of Ontario. Mr. Ray, welcome, Mr. Ray. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. See you all. Pleasure to be with you.
Perhaps I can introduce Randy, and then I will say a couple of things to maybe start your discussion today.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Randy Boswell is a lawyer who specializes in pensions, benefits, and executive compensation. He is considered one of the leading pension lawyers in Canada. He is located in the Toronto office of the law firm McCarthy. Randy is considered an expert on environmental, social, and governance issues, ESG, investment issues. These are becoming more important than ever for both businesses and pension Randy's clients for ESG-related legal advice include not only pension funds and other financial institutions, but governments and agencies such as the United Nations. Randy is also an independent expert in the state of West Canada's largest pension plans, largest benefits plan. So he comes at our topic from the perspective of the plan fiduciary plan, as well as a lawyer, as well as a lawyer. Mr. Boswell. Now, I saw Ambassador Ray that you had participated in many interesting events. One will be broadcast, I believe, on Sunday with Rosemary Barton Live. And perhaps we'll have some comments to make about the interview that we can watch on Sunday. But I also wanted to mention for March 20 address to the UN General Assembly. That was 2 months ago. At that time, you said 10 million people displaced. Just in 4 weeks, terrible conflict, this cruel war of aggression. In just 25 days, 52 attacks occurred against health care, against health centers. There's an obligation. There are obligations under the international humanitarian law, and these obligations are being ignored by this aggressor. Perhaps you can give us some of your comments.
Thank you very much. I can be ready to be on the panel. I'm rapidly approaching the time of many people. I should be on a bench. So I look forward to meeting with you later on. Not quite yet. It's very here. I'm very happy here. I'm very much present with this group and with such a distinguished artist. Spoke earlier with such passion, with such work, his vision. And I try to be as concise as I can about the situation. That's what I'm referring to as views that refer to as general an assembly on behalf of Canada. And at that time, there was nothing to now there's close to 15 million who have been displaced. The brutality of this brutality has shifted in some ways. So the conduct of the war has evolved since it started. But the challenge is not changing. Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, and has attacks continued since that time. And it's been a situation that was suffering a long period of time, never being resolved, because Russia refused to recognize aggression in Crimea. There were some sanctions introduced, but the sanctions were not strong enough to deter Russia. And I think we can talk a bit about later on why the world lost to respond to aggression. I have a theory about that. But nevertheless, an additional situation where since February the 24th, Russia has decided to launch a war of aggression against Ukraine, with the alleged purpose of achieving what they call the demilitarization of Ukraine, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And while there was a lot of speculation in the weeks building up to the announcement of the invasion, as to what Russia's objective really be. It's now clear that Russia's original objectives after February the 24th were the destruction of state and the government of Ukraine, and they launched the fallout war. They described it as a special military operation. Nothing special about it. And that war involved trying to bomb every city in Ukraine to terrorize the population and to undermine support the government of Ukraine and their resistance to the invasion. And the invasion took place not only in the eastern part of the country, but upwards from Crimea through to Kherson, and south from Belarus to Kyiv. And I think Russia was astonished by the extent of the Ukrainian response, by its ability to resist, and I think they were also surprised the extent to which Western governments did not join directly in having troops on the ground in Ukraine. They did. Over a period of time, they had to provide a considerable support to the Ukrainian government, to the Ukrainian army, in responding to the severity of aggression, which was not ground troop activity, but also missile attacks on many cities, as well as bombing from the air. I want to say to this about that in particular, that I really believe world opinion, popular opinion, not necessarily what states or governments, but the popular opinion of the world has been galvanized by the resistance and courage of the Ukrainian people, and by the resistance and inspiration of Zelensky, and by the ability of him to arouse all of us to understand the attack, which is currently underway. As you know, the Russians have withdrawn from north. They have serious defeat in their attempt to take over Kyiv. But they are continuing to fight from the east to the west, from the south, a very vigorous attack, which is continuing as we speak. The nature of the Russian attack is it's broken. It's every rule of war, every principle of conventions of how war is supposed to be conducted, of maximizing civilians, not destroying schools and infrastructure. But that's all been thrown away. And the only rule right now the principles of the charter, and also the end for international inevitability for what Russia is doing. I'm referring to the beginning. I understand why the West was so slow to respond to the attack on Crimea. I don't fully understand it myself. I was shocked by the speech. People were willing to accept that aggression. But I think everybody underestimated what Putin was really up to. But as with he himself revealed his game plan in various statements that he's made, where it's clear that the Ukrainian people are people believe Ukrainian language is not like Ukraine. Ukraine is a separate state, protection of respect. He has no concept of the difference. In fact, if Ukraine is not Ukraine is extension of Russian empire, Ukrainians are independent. Culture for thousands of years. And I think the world made aware of all this much more rapidly as a result of what Mr. Putin has said. What people around him have said, and above all, Ukraine has been able to do. So we now have which is large. The project is first of all consisting of all the necessary aid necessary both financially, militarily, and that is now frankly anybody anticipated at the end of February that is now very much in place. And we have to continue to make sure that our government and other governments will do what is necessary to achieve success. Let us be illusions. Success involves Russia withdrawing the territories that it is occupied, and it involves no accession, the notion of being able to seize land by force, and that I think is critically important. The other thing that we've been working on particularly hard is humanitarian assistance for providing to those who are inside, and that involves nations of hundreds of millions and billions of assistance to refugees and involve refugees to Canada, and develop a plan with 12 other governments to make sure that Ukrainians are able to live in dignity, live in other countries as they cannot stay where they are, but stay where they are. Although I have to say, today there was a report indicating that there are literally millions of return particularly in the West, and that that's a really there's a lot of movement of people back and forth. Finally, we have to deal with the issue and we have to deal with the sanctions. We have put on sanctions, and we need citizens and organizations to continue to win that approach to sanctions. Russian businesses, because we're dealing with a country that has become a rogue nation. Russia has gone from being a member of the G20 an active permanent member of the United Nations to becoming a pariah, a rogue country. That is intolerable for the community to accept. We put in place sanctions. Unprecedented harshness, but it will continue. Sanctions will grow. They will in fact grow. As they should. And second, we have to do this accountability. We're doing everything we can to make sure that Russia is held accountable. Those who are as individuals responsible for their actions. International criminal, and international court of justice, other ways in which we can assistance. There's accountability for support. It's a tragic situation. I think we've all been removed and affected profoundly by what we've seen, what we know, what we hear, what families are experiencing, exactly the fact that it's happened on the civilian population. I also think it's important to say that we're now at a point, there's no going back. We've gone this far to recognize that the fight against tyranny and somehow the fight against it takes a long time. It's a struggle. Once you get started, you can't stop. And we are now fully committed to this fight against tyranny, and we're fully committed to succeeding. That I think is something that we should all be aware of as we go forward in this struggle.
Thank you very, very much for those comments. Perhaps I can ask Randy a couple of questions, and feel free if there's something that you'd like to add as we go through this. Randy, and you may also want to comment on some of the things that Ambassador Ray has said.
Maybe we could start.
All right, let's start right there.
First, I just want to say how grateful I am to be invited to this panel. It was great for me. Secondly, I just want to say how important this is. I hope that you online will come online and come view it. Mr. Ray talked about the fight against Russia was Russia's way of responding as well. And one of the reasons I think it's important for people to come in is this is really good art. And like all good art, it has a real ability to communicate beyond what words can. It has an immediacy, it has an emotionalism, and a power that words just can't express. And I think these images that are on the wall raw the power of these images, of these images, way beyond what I could express in words. So I think this exhibit is giving us another of an aspect of this work that is really important. It's showing us what we could lose. I can't imagine, Mr. Putin, in his empire or whatever it is he's trying to create, that this art would ever circulate the emotional response I have to it, that you may have, that others may see, can never be expressed. It's just something to be lost. So the other thing I would like to say is I would like to great deal of thanks for the artists for bringing this to us here. And secondly, Mykola, you mentioned, being soldiering on or being a soldier in this war. And I think we're a cultural soldier. That's exactly what it is. It's bringing our attention in a way that words just can't express. It's extremely powerful. I'm feeling very emotional. I'll end that there. Let you get back to the questions, but Mr. Ray mentioned that there are other aspects of this. I think what is this part of the country? It's its culture. It's its art. It's the way it expresses itself. And that's what we see here.
You're absolutely correct. Art, music, poetry, writing, journalism, those are the things that evil empires want to destroy. Because those are very, very powerful things. And Ukraine is showing how powerful it can be. It can now, and for the last 3 months, and its citizens are helping. And hopefully we can help its citizens, and hopefully our governments, our companies can help do that as And that brings me to the other part of the program, which is what can companies do, what can pension funds do. You mentioned to me that McDonald's and Pepsi, they're pulling out. They're pulling Ukraine. They've announced that they're closing or selling their operations in Russia. That's better. Yeah, they're pulling out of Russia as a result of the war. Is there a lot of this going on? And would you say it's significant?
Well, I think it's surprising how significant it is and how little we actually hear about it unless you're involved the investment financial industry. But there is a lot of selling. There is a lot of selling and sometimes at a loss. I mean, it's not like there's enough to get out of Russia. I mean, they've closed the stock market. So it's not like you go to just sell your shares. You got to find your shares. You got to find a way of getting out of those. There's also a lot of relationships that passed over the years that had all kinds of intertwined corporate to them. And those all kind of undone. But there was an article in the New York Times. Well, let's go. It was updated. I just want to read a little bit. Just want to give you a sense of who is leaving and what has gone already. And the title is "Companies Are Getting Out of Russia Sometimes at a Cost." It's all sectors. It's not just one or two sectors. It's across the economy. So consumer goods and retail goods, British American tobacco, Canada Goose is ceasing its wholesale e-commerce sales. Doesn't have facilities there, but it's pulling back out of Russia. Japanese clothing, H&M. I'm not going to read all of them. I just want to give you a sample. Nestle, Unilever, Unilever. They're all pulling out, or they're suspending their operations. In energy, Exxon, Shell, they're all the relationships that we have with oil and gas companies in Russia and ceasing operations there as well. On the area of finance, American Express, Bank of America, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank said it was in the process of winding down our remaining business clients, reduce operations, Goldman Sachs, Association of House, the third largest is pulling out. They're willing to take because they must see a longer volatile and more disastrous for them to take it now. And that's not an instant. That's not 3.1 billion. Visa, food sector, Carlsberg, Heineken, beer companies, little Caesars, have these franchises there. Mars, other candy makers, the candy M&M's, McDonald's, it's selling its licensed franchise. So it's trying to offload the 800 or so shops it has across the country. I mean, that just doesn't sound big because I think there's great stuff. There's 500 franchises and franchises. Still, that's a lot of disentangled to get through. And what do you do with those stores and who takes them over and how do you get out without just abandoning them? And you mentioned Starbucks, in the media, Netflix, Walt Disney, Warner Bros. Disney, professional services, your consulting. I'm not sure you have, not just the consulting firms like the ones you work for, like Boston Consulting, leading, all of the four major accounting firms are leaving. They're leaving. That's Deloitte, EY, KPMG, PwC, all pulling Russia. The tech sector, Amazon, Google, IBM, Nokia. There's Nokia. That's a longer list. But they're much more relationships and consumption. They've got other licensing. They can't just track. Just think about what they're going to do. But they've all announced their support, pulling out. Travel and logistics, American Airlines, FedEx. Getting to the end of my list, I just want to go through it.
because you get a sense of how much is out there is in real terms when you the manufacturing Caterpillar, Hitachi. The French car maker Renault has to deal with the Russian manufacturer, but it's suspending that and getting out, and it's also getting out at $2.3 billion in the first quarter. Siemens, Tata Steel. Sometimes we think, Tata Steel is one of the largest steel manufacturers worldwide in India. It's company. And this Indian steel giant said it's going to stop doing business construction, and it's starting to alternative suppliers for the raw materials it needs to make steel. That's huge. I think it's huge. Anyway, I think
that gives you a sense in terms of are people pulling out and withdrawing? Yes, they are. It's not an easy thing. It's complicated, but they're going there because I think they see, even though they've spent 30 years trying to develop relationships, those relationships are coming to an end because this is a scene, this is a stage they don't understand. They don't recognize anymore. They're getting up before it gets even. But what about the shareholders?
If I could just check in here, say that I think one of the other most interesting things for me is that people are leaving Russia. Skilled workers are leaving Russia. Talented people who work in all the industries that Randy has described are leaving Russia. This is going to have major implications for the Russian economy and for Russian society going forward. And none of it good, but all of it inevitable because of what Putin has done. And so the exit of people and of families and of talent from Russia is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this. And I think ultimately, if that's what's going to undermine the basis for the invasion and the basis for Putin's power, I think that all the bluster and all the attempts at intimidation notwithstanding, we need to understand that what Putin is doing is self-destructive. It's self-destructive of this country. And I think that's what eventually somehow people will realize how self-destructive he's really is, and that may help to drive change.
Yes, I've been hearing that they're considering how can we get rid of internally.
Well, that's another option. That might happen. But I think what we do understand the longer term of a society having a base of people who are leaders who are contributing to society and who have mobility. And over the last 30 years, people have developed linkages and connections with the rest of the world. And they don't want to be stuck where they're stuck, and they won't be. And that, I think, is a very profound undermining of Putin's power and strength.
Maybe I can ask you, Randy, about your specialty, about pension plans or pension funds. Can they make a big difference? They just can't, take a loss and leave. It's not like a corporation, just because they have an issue with Russia's ethical conduct. Can they do that? Given pension plan administrators are fiduciaries, and they have an obligation to obtain a reasonable return without undue risk of loss, can they divest due to ethical concerns and not worry about potential losses? Well, I think the short answer to your question is they can't just leave because they're affronted by the ethics. Corporations, just to draw an analogy, a corporation, the fiduciaries of a corporation are its officers and directors, and they have the duty to act in the best interests of the corporation. And we've had 3 decades of Supreme Court of Canada decisions saying that means that doesn't mean just the shareholders. It's not just about profits. They can take into account the interests of other stakeholders. So not just shareholders, but employees, retirees, pensioners, creditors, lenders, consumers, governments. They can also take into account the environment, and they can also take into account
long-term interests of the corporation and make investments and do things that will impact, achieve those kinds of impacts, benefit those constituencies, because ultimately they need to act in the best interest of the corporation. Whereas pension funds, slightly different. I mean, if you look at it from a corporate perspective, they're kind of like on a multi-lane highway with all the stakeholders, and they can get into different lanes, whichever is working best for the corporation at the time. Whereas pension funds, particularly pension funds in Canada, if you want to maintain your tax status, your preferential tax status you get, you have to adhere to what the purpose of that plan is. And the Tax Act says the primary purpose has to be to provide lifetime retirement income in consideration for services rendered. So that's a financial purpose. So their lane, as you've identified, has to be a financial lane. But I look at this, and I just look at that list of companies that are leaving. This does not look like a friendly financial environment to stick around in and figure out what's going to go on. Pension funds are also really, really wary of anything that looks like it could be volatile or uncertain. And this, boy, has question marks all over it. So I think from a pension fund perspective, I don't have to get into the ethics of this. This isn't like the South African ethical investment issue from the 80s. This is more concrete. We can actually see what the economic effect is likely to be, that it is very volatile, that companies are leaving left, right, and center, and you don't want to be the last one holding the bag. So the other point I'll make is pension funds don't have a lot of, these Canadian funds don't have a lot of juice in Russia. I think one of the biggest investors in Russia, from a pension fund perspective, I act for a lot of pension funds, so I don't want to reference anyone in particular, but I'll use a nice US example, CalPERS, the California Pension for Employee Retirement System. It has I think about a $1 billion investment in Russia, which is less than 1% of all of its assets. So pulling out is not a huge financial risk, and pulling out at this point, which is what they're proposing to do, makes a lot of sense, because why do you want your money hanging around knowing you're not going to get, you could get nothing at the end. It's just too volatile. And again, as you said, the goal with a pension fund isn't to knock the lights out and maximize the returns for pension members. What the goal is to get a reasonable rate of return without undue risk of loss, having regard to all of the relevant circumstances. So I think there's a good financial reason for them to pull out. It's just too volatile, too risky an environment for them to stick around.
So then,
Adhun, I'm sorry, I have a hard stop at, as you said, you went a hard stop at 8 o'clock because I have another Zoom call that I have to get on, and I know you might sound the light here doesn't stop during business hours. So I have to leave you, but I really appreciate the chance to be with both of you and with the audience and with Baroka and with his very moving comments at the beginning. I really appreciate the chance to be with you and to be with the audience, and I will continue to stay in touch with the Ukrainian community. I'll be up in Toronto in June and again in September, and I look forward to meeting with members of the community and talking more about these issues as we go forward. But thank you very much for letting me join me. I really appreciate it.
thank you so much. Thank you so much. We've been very, very fortunate to have Ambassador Ray with us. Perhaps we can see one last question for you, Randy, and then if anybody has any questions for Randy from the audience, we can take those. And then, as I say, please stick around for the surprise and additional material about the show. So you talked about how pension funds are supposed to have a financial goal for their investments. But in this circumstance, should they divest from Russia? You indicated they probably can. They can make a case for it. But do they have to?
Well, I think whether they have to is a decision that needs to be made by the pension fund fiduciaries. They certainly they can. I think if they just ignore it, they're in danger of getting sued. So they need to consider it, and then they can determine whether they need to get out or not get out. But I would think, see, I mentioned at the beginning that pension funds, they really have to stay in their lane, this financial lane. They're not get into these other lanes. But the reality is, for the large pension funds in our country, well, first of all, let me just put it in perspective. There's 17,000 registered pension funds, almost 17,000 registered pension funds in the country. More than 2/3 of them have fewer than 10 members. So they're really mostly small. The top 38 pension funds in the country represent something like 52% of all the pension assets and 58% of all the plan members. So once you get below these 32 big ones, you don't have a lot of other pension funds making direct investments in Russia. They're going through intermediaries like mutual funds or ETFs, just like you and I do. In fact, you might get down to the top 100 or 150 out of that 17,000 that are making some direct investments, but after that it peters out completely. So I think for those large funds, they're sophisticated enough to know we can't hang around in an environment that is uncertain. So they're unlikely to make investments in an area that's uncertain, and when something becomes uncertain, they're more likely to be the nervous Nellies that get out first. So hopefully they are, and those who decide we're not getting out, it's a risk, because your members may take issue, you may get sued over it, there may be a class action, there may be nonsense suits you have to put up with people that are just upset on ethical grounds that you're not out. So they'll have to deal with that if they are pulled out. And I can't imagine they wouldn't be pulled out. But the other thing that big funds have to worry about, because they are investors in these parts of the world, is, and I said they don't need to be concerned about what the members think ethically, but they do, really. Right? I mean, if I'm running a big pension fund, I know the heart and soul of my fiduciary obligation is just keep an eye on that financial side. But I also know I got members, and I got members who are upset. I got members that possibly have relatives I have in the area or the region. I know from a reputational perspective, I've got to communicate this in a way that suggests I'm paying attention to those ethical and other kinds of values. It's not just about value. When I communicate it, it's going to be about values, because that also instills confidence in the system. So from a fiduciary perspective, as their lawyer, I say, don't just go out and say, we're doing this because it's ethically the right thing to do. Muzzle the ethical stuff, or just tone it down, because the main reason you're doing this as a fiduciary is financial. But secondarily, or in your communication, you may want to be continuing to communicate in a way that promotes the confidence that your members and plan beneficiaries have in the plan itself. So I know that sounds like lawyer doublespeak, and it kind of is, but it's just a reflection of what the reality is. As a lawyer, I say, muzzle the ethical considerations, focus on the financial, but as your trusted advisor, I know you're going to put this stuff in there, so when you do it, just modify the language so it doesn't come across as you're making decisions on a basis other than a financial risk. Sorry, that wasn't too complicated. I know we've got corporate people and pension people in the audience. So.
We have a wide variety of people in the audience tonight. Do any of the people in the audience have any questions for Randy? Yes.
I was listening to this issue. I was wondering how it differs from ESG investment, where pension funds are focusing on companies that have positive ESG scores. This is not the same type of issue, right?
It's exactly the same. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So the question is whether this is really like these ESG issues, and pension funds are giving consideration to environmental, social, and governance factors when they make investments, and aren't these ethical issues, and aren't they sort of going down that road? Well, pension funds do take into account environmental, social, and governance factors. And what I tell them as a lawyer is that is a good thing to do because really what it is just giving you more information to make better financial decisions. People sometimes call these ESG factors non-financial factors. And so I ask, well, what is a financial factor? I'm going to invest in a new company. They've got a new CEO. I want to know who the lead people are in that company. I know the CEO is under indictment for some fraud somewhere else, and one of the vice presidents he picked up from another company who's also a dodgy character. I'm going to take that into account before investing in that company. Is that a financial factor? I don't think so. It's a governance factor. It gives me trust but it's informing my financial decision to stay invested. So these ESG, it is the same as these ESG factors, but I just want to say, these ESG factors are often called non-financial factors. They're not, they're just more information. And if those factors are of relevance to the financial situation, and they're material, and you don't take them into account, you've got a problem. What concerns me is somebody saying about climate change, for example. I'm going to invest in a fund that says it's green and it's going to make an impact and change the way we do business to protect the environment. They're going to have an impact on the environment. That muzzle the impact stuff, just take a look at it from a financial perspective. Another thing that some of my pension fund clients are doing, big ones, is recently you will have seen that they're all talking about net zero emissions by 2050. And then they come to me and ask me to read the policy and read what they're about to announce. And so, well, presumptively, when you say what you're doing is setting a 2050 zero emission policy, that's offside. You're looking at an impact. But they know, and I know, that 2050 goal of getting to zero emissions, that is informing. It's another yardstick by which they can measure. They all realize you can't have an economy if you can't breathe, right? Like you can't. We've got to do something about it. There's evidence that climate change is real. There's lots of evidence that it's real. So if you're going to take it into account, you're going to take it into account from a financial perspective in terms of what kind of risk do I get into from a climate change perspective by investing in X or Y. So let me give you an example. I've got an opportunity to build condos on the beach in Miami. Good investment? If sea levels are going to rise at the minimum level that they're talking about by the end of the century, or even the middle of the century, and it's a 6-inch rise or a 9-inch rise in sea level, to me, that sounds like you're putting yourself in a position to be having infrastructure problems almost as soon as you get finished with your project. But if somebody presents me with, well, wait a minute, why don't we build seawalls in Lower Manhattan? That sounds like a good idea. Now I'm protecting my subway system and my other systems. I'm protecting my infrastructure. I can probably make a profit out of this, so that to me sounds like a good investment. So these ESG factors and the climate change factors, for example, create opportunities as well as risks. That 2050 zero emission goal is just another way of measuring the risk. And I know one of my clients put in their announcement that the 2050 zero emission is not a goal in and of itself. It's a means of ensuring we're on track with our other investment objectives to achieve the financial returns or the reduction in financial risk that we're trying to achieve. Now, I'm looking at somebody in the back row here who's looking at me like this. Okay, that's the boy that comes. You know what? It is. How broadly is this recording going to be? Yeah, we don't need it. Yeah, we don't need it. But the point is, for pension funds, the focus has to be financial. So you're always driving it back to the financial. I was at a meeting of I'll just share this with you because it's an interesting anecdote about this double-speak stuff. I got invited as a keynote speaker at a meeting of trustees of one of the large American funds, and I was supposed to be talking about, I think, delegation of authority from the trustees down to the staff people. And they invited me to the breakfast, and over breakfast I'm talking to a couple of the trustees, and they said, I read your thing on the CSG issue, and we were just wondering, we as a board don't like it that we're investing in private prisons. It's a bet on crime. It's awful. It's morally reprehensible. And all the union trustees, all the management trustees, we all agree this is just not where we want to be. And we went to the Attorney General with an opinion and said, well, the cash flows are good, the financial statements are good. You don't have the right to really get out of this. And I said, well, why don't you go back and say, you're re-looking at it. You're looking at I've read in the papers in the U.S. where they're talking about legislation to put restrictions on private prisons because of overcrowding and accidents that have happened. I know, I've read, again, there's a couple of lawsuits against private prisons because of things that happen to prisoners or class actions with the inmates themselves, that some states are talking about imposing restrictions, some states are talking about just converting them back to a public sector thing. Why don't you just go back and say, we as a board feel that this is, it's no longer the certain financial, we're getting a good run right now, but maybe we should be out of it before things turn the other way, and this becomes something that's unpredictable, and you just put it into financial terms and then go ask your Attorney General if it's okay for you to back out of this. And my guess is they'll say, sure. And again, it's my advice, muzzle the ethics, muzzle the ethical concerns, muzzle the climate impact concerns, and focus on the financial. And to me, and what he said to me was, that sounds like doublespeak. And I said, well, maybe it is, but if your rationale is focused on the financial, you can go on. Yes.
Right, you mentioned that many companies are leaving Russia. You also mentioned that the ethical questions arguments be put down and financial arguments be emphasized. And yet, 75% of the Russian population strongly support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Our corporations are not doing enough. Our Russian people simply don't get it, they don't get the message. Or, we're at that stage, and given that we're surrounded by Ukraine, that's sort of the mandate. The Carthage needs to be destroyed. Are we at that stage where Moscow needs to be destroyed in order that we can break through? Sorry, what needs to be destroyed? Carthage needs to be destroyed.
Carthage? Oh, are we
at that stage where Moscow needs to be destroyed so that we can live through, and the civilized world, the rest of civilized world needs to be can live through? So we don't think of that.
Well, I can't repeat your whole question. So, but do you want to wander for the next question in case it's not? But I think if I respond, you'll get the gist of what your question must have been. So first of all, I want to draw a distinction between corporations. Because corporations remember that the fiduciaries there have to act in the best interest of the corporation. So they can take into account some of this ethical stuff. Because they've got a reputation to maintain in order to sell their goods to consumers and others. Or to continue the relationships they have with lenders or with other service providers to them, and with their own employee base. Whereas pension fiduciaries have to focus on the financial. So it's not corporations that, they need to take into account the financial, obviously, but they also have these other factors that they can think about. And so I think your question was, do we have to reduce Russia?
Our corporations, are they not doing simply enough to change the behavior of the Russian people if they overwhelmingly support Russia's invasion of Ukraine? And are we as corporate citizens of the West of the Europe and North America, are we doing enough to change the Russian behavior, or are we not doing enough? And if we're not doing enough, maybe we should escalate to a higher level.
So the question is, are we as North American and European corporations with investments in Russia, we just pull out and we leave Russia to its own devices? Are we doing enough? Is that enough to actually change the behavior? I don't know. I don't know. But I don't know that I, as a corporation, it's up to each corporation to assess. If they think they can make a difference in Russia and have a positive effect, and that's going to increase the bottom line, and that's going to be in the best interest of the corporation, sure, if they can do that, that's what they can do. But we're talking about corporations that are centered outside of Russia, and we know outside of Russia, the feelings about Russia and being in Russia are probably not going to be taken well by consumers and creditors and others like corporations. So I'm not sure what else corporations can do unless they've got really huge footprint in Russia where they need to make a difference to be able to be acting in the best interest of the corporation. Does that make sense?
Well, but let me just say something. It is now almost 20 after 8, and I think from the comments that we've had from Ambassador Ray and from Randy, with respect to all the companies pointing out, the intelligent, intellectual people, a lot of people leaving Russia, all of the art that we see around us expressing what's happening in the region, I think people want to talk about it here tonight. I think some people want to, just like you want to talk about it to others, right? You want to say, are we doing enough? What more can we do? Is there anything that's going to change the minds of some of these people in Russia? But it does sound like Ambassador Ray thinks that a number of people are leaving Russia, millions of people leaving Russia. And you've indicated 75% of Russians are in favor, but maybe that's propaganda. Maybe that's propaganda. We don't know. And we have another person who'd like to speak, but I am supposed to kind of ease us into the next part of the discussion, which would be opportunities to speak with each other and opportunities to view the art a little bit more and a couple of surprises. Do you think what your question you could talk with some others here today about that, or do you really feel strongly that you'd like to join before we end our question period?
Well, I think the question is because it's a sector that you haven't mentioned. Thank you. So my question relates to a sector you haven't mentioned. It can be a point of discussion. It would have been great for Ambassador Ray to comment on this question because the sector is the charitable sector. And so do the same things apply to the charitable sector? Should they divest? Should they get out of Russia? And that's a question maybe for the audience. We have charitable organizations who are trying to, toe the line or have one foot in one camp and another foot in another. So the charitable sector, should the charitable sector divest as well? That's the question, maybe for you or maybe for the audience as well.
I really like this question.
Well, this is the last question that you can comment on, and then we'll call
because this. Well, my answer is going to be short. I think it's a great question. It's a better question for all of you to be discussing. It doesn't fall really within it's not a pension question because pensions aren't charities. It's not a corporate question because corporations aren't charities. It is something that's special and unique, I think, for the charitable world. I have my views, but I'm happy to talk to you about it separately. But I think this is a really great question because it brings all of these threads together. So thank you for that. And then you've got a question. The bill should have the mic.
Сказати, що у нас дуже мало часу. Буквально два речення. Я хочу сказати про благодійні фонди. Доброго вечора, я з України. До речі, хочу вам сказати, що я з України тільки 2 неділі, через 2 тижні, через тиждень буду їхати знову. Я приїхав з того пекла, з самого Києва, де бомбили, стріляли, душили і так далі. Але я хочу сказати, я почув, що тут, що розказували, мені з великим задоволенням переклали, і я хочу вам сказати ось що. Україна зараз не бореться з Росією. Україна бореться із світовим злом. І ми дуже раді тим, хто підтримує Україну. Тому що ми боремося в тому числі і з тими, хто може чинити якусь загрозу для всього світу.
Because we are also fighting those who can create a terror for the rest of
І
the
коли
world.
ми тут обговорювали ці всі питання, я хотів би, щоб ми розділили це діло на 2 напрямки, принаймні як мінімум.
I want these issues to be divided at least in 2
Це
directions.
мілітарний, а другий гуманітарний.
First is the military direction, then the humanitarian
До
direction.
мілітарних питань має мати відношення тільки держава, вона повинна поставляти зброю, ту, яку треба амуніцію,
Military questions
і
should be
надавати підтримку.
answered only by the government. They could supply weapons and all that
Позиція
and support.
громадських організацій, фондів і небайдужих людей зводиться до того, що необхідно підтримати
And those disturbed,
тих
we need to
бездолених людей.
support those people that are lost so much.
Мільйони людей
Millions of people
виїхали із
left
зони там, де бомбили, там, де
From the
бомбили,
bombed
де
areas.
знущалися над людьми.
where the people were tortured.
Частина з них виїхала дійсно за кордон,
Many that
а
came
частина
to
виїхала
across the
ближче
border,
до Західної України.
and many stayed in
Ми
Ukraine,
говорили про
Western Ukraine.
фонди, я хочу сказати, що
And we spoke about funds.
фонди
And to
це
say
добре, але в мене коли
funds is great,
виникла
but
ця така цікава ідея. Я б хотів, щоб ви її подумали. Ви багато збираєте коштів для того, щоб купляти одяг для дітей, для дорослих,
you collect a lot of funds to buy
продукти
clothing
харчування і
and
таке інше.
groceries and so on.
А ви не хочете подумати над тим, що, може, доцільніше було би створити якесь підприємство на території України, де буде багато задіяно людей. І ці кошти, які ви даєте на це майно, вони будуть вироблятися в Україні. Люди будуть задіяні. Чому вони повертаються назад?
Why don't we create an enterprise on the territory of Ukraine, involving people in Ukraine to produce these things in Ukraine?
Знаєте, мене тішить те, що Канада має добру діаспору і
Canada has a
людей,
wonderful diaspora
небайдужих людей, які
of
підтримують
brilliant people
Україну. За
that
це
care.
велике спасибі.
Thank you so much.
Але як раніше говорили так, щоб не вийшло так, що на дні народження Брежнєва, тобто на дні народження когось там із чиновників весь час говорили про Брежнєва, то я хочу сказати дещо про виставку.
I want to say something about the exhibition.
Я коли зайшов і подивився, вона така, знаєте, якась обурна, жорстока, така страшна. Але я потім
It's a tough exhibition.
що
It's
це
disturbing. It's
бачення
insulting.
художника,
Scary.
який показав оцього ненависного ворога,
But this is artist's perception of our enemy.
оцього чорта в овечій шкурі.
This devil in a lamb skin.
Я вважаю, що це дуже потрібна робота,
It's a very important
і
and needed
вдячний
work, and
автору
I'm very
і
thankful to the author.
ідеї ці. Думаю, що
And I say
таке
this.
словосполучення, як чорт або вовк у овечій шкурі, на наступній презентації він може використати з посиланням, що це його ідея. Вам всім всього найкращого і до побачення. Вибачте, що я, можливо, вніс
All
дисонанс.
the best to
Але
you.
я так
Sorry
сказав.
for
До речі, я не сказав про себе. Я все життя пропрацював адвокатом. Понад 40 років. Іншої роботи ніякої не робив.
I worked
Yeah.
40 years as an attorney. Just wanted to add something.
Well, thanks very much for that. And I think you mentioned landscape. Kind of bear scene and bear faces. So.
The one I'll freewheel
And
right now.
So, after, the one question I would have asked Ambassador Ray if he was still around was, Mr. Putin says he's going to the G20. What are the limits on diplomatic immunity? Because I think that serious crimes, diplomatic immunity no longer applies. And whether there would be a willingness if he arrives in Jakarta to make an arrest at that time, and that would change the script in Russia considerably. But that's just for another day. Anyway, that's my 2 cents as far as the question. We're a little bit over time, so I think what we're going to do is we wanted to give Mykola and Daria a chance to talk about a couple of pieces of artwork that are part of the current exhibition. But they arrived as artists in residence. If anybody made their way over to the furthest part of the gallery, they would have seen 2 rooms. And one of those rooms was where Daria toiled to make a new creation that had a Canadian element to it. And the other room is where Mykola worked on several new creations, but one in particular that he would like to reveal as a new work that becomes part of this exposition going forward. So what I'd like to do now is maybe we can talk about a couple of pieces here that Mykola can speak to in the existing exhibition. And if you have patience, then we'll reveal these 2 new pieces, which I think are quite impressive. So I'll leave it to, if we can have both mics, maybe Mykola can speak and Rita can speak, maybe Battle of Ukraine and the Incisions in Time. I don't know. We'll take it from there.
So, hi there again. First of all, thank you so much. You really stirred the pot here. I think everybody who gets to the mic wants to talk, including me. But definitely, one language that any Russian government would understand is the language of photography. So this is the right way to go because we're dealing with criminals, frankly, and that's the only way to deal with it. So the role of pension funds, corporations is ever so important. When it comes to art, first of all, I'd like to again reiterate that Mykola is one of the really significant artists from Ukraine, as we only can compare to one of those of Canadian artists, a group of 7 who established what we know now as Canadian art. Mykola and a group of other artists from Ukraine, Petra Gabza, they have established what we know now as a modern Ukrainian art. After graduation from the art school, they did not go to Moscow, they stayed in Ukraine, and they started to create. They caught up few generations. And Mykola, as you can see today, had created such a body of work that is not typical for him. Where before he was exploring the ideas of family values and love and religion, he speaks in his pieces, which are called Incision in Times, that his cup is full. The amount of misinformation and propaganda that was coming from across the border from Russia filled him up to the brim, and those chalices that you see, they're full. And he could not tolerate any longer what he's seeing. That was 2013 to 2014. And he creates these 2 large panels. He speaks about the accumulation of Russian military along the borders of Donetsk and Lugansk, and he says, the war is coming. These pieces called Incision in Time. Just like layers in time, he sees the Donetsk and Lugansk are turning into graveyards. He uses materials such as bandages, such as broken helmets of the soldiers, and he speaks about death. He saw what Russia was bringing was death to Ukraine, and you can see a freshly dug graves covered with flowers, Ukraine usually covers their fresh grapes with fake flowers. I'll speak about those two panels behind you. Sorry for inconvenience, but you would have to turn. In 1937, in Paris Salon, there was a revelation of the piece, Mykola sculpture. Vera Mykola had created a sculpture of a worker and a kolkhoznica, a farmer. They were holding a sickle and a hammer, and that became a symbol of communism. Initially, we would say a quite innocent work, but this is how Mykola sees Russian heroes today. Very aggressive, really sadistic, holding children's toys as trophies, armed to teeth, and using church. You see the crosses there with that cross with the hammer and sickle, using church as their weapon. I will draw your attention now to this wonderful large panel. This is Mykola's early panel. I will give the word to Mykola to speak about that work. It is an old and often referred to the worst time. And there are examples of Goya's famous Spanish artist. He created a series of work devoted to war. Picasso's Guernica. Which is now exhibited in New York at the United Nations. Why? Because artists are part of the society. And they react to the events that are happening in the society. I made my battle for Ukraine.
Яка, в принципі, проходить вже 14 років, не тільки сьогодні.
This battle is happening since 2014.
І образ українця на Тараса Григоровича Шевченка.
And the Ukrainian depicted by Taras Grigorьевич Shevchenko.
В багатьох країнах є людина, яка є патріархом цієї культури і нації.
In many countries, they have like a patriarch of culture, like messiah of culture.
Як Міцкевич для Польщі,
Mickiewicz is for Poland,
Гьоте для Німеччини,
Goethe is for Germany,
для України це Тарас Григорович Шевченко.
Taras Grigorьевич Shevchenko is messiah of Ukrainian culture.
І так співпало, що в 2014 році після Майдану 200 років відбулося, 200 років з дня народження Тараса Шевченка.
In 2014, we were celebrating 200 years since the birth of Shevchenko.
І часто на Майдані ми бачили його з текстом, з віршами Тараса Григоровича.
And we saw his poetry often on Maidan in Square in Ukraine.
Я подумав, він давно помер, але він живий і сьогодні.
I thought he died long ago, but he is alive even today.
І він сьогодні, я зобразив Росію в вигляді курки двоголової, не орла.
I depicted the Russia with an image of that double-headed chicken, not the eagle, please note.
Тому що орел дуже горда птаха, щоб її зобразувати як символ.
I couldn't use it as a symbol of Russia. The eagle is too proud, noble bird.
І зробив так, що Тарас Григорович перебуває головою.
So Shevchenko is piercing the head of one.
І ламає всю українців в образі Тараса Шевченка для частини.
So part of us Ukrainians are Shevchenko.
Вони руйнують комуністичну російську імперську систему.
These people, in the image of Shevchenko, are destroying Russian communist empire.
І повірте, якраз через Україну світ стане більш вільним і більш безпечним після цієї битви.
Trust me, after this battle, the world will be a safer place.
І він переможе, Україна переможе.
Ukraine will win. So now we will proceed to our two surprises that I've promised
So,
everyone.
I think it's time we hear from Daria, don't you think? You're going to be hearing Daria. So, if you see the flag, which is incredibly powerful, that Daria created in 2014, but she has created something new. So maybe you can talk about what your thought process was, Daria, and then we'll reveal yours.
Доброго вечора, ще раз.
Good evening, everyone.
Шановні товариство, дуже рада бачити всіх вас тут.
I'm very happy to see you too.
Спершу я хотіла би подякувати CNE за те, що ми мали таку можливість доставляти свої роботи тут і при тому ще й працювати тут на території CNE.
In the first and foremost, I want to say a big thank you to Canadian National Exhibition for not just an opportunity to show our work, but also for giving us an opportunity to work during these 2 months.
На протязі цього місяця ми зробили з Миколою по одній роботі.
In the course of these 2 months, we did each a work here.
Раніше, як ви бачите, я вже зробила прапор України.
So you've seen my flag of Ukraine that is displayed right now.
Основною такою ідеєю прапору являються руки, які символізують єдність.
The main, oh, here it is.
Цей прапор я створила на протязі цього місяця.
This flag I created in the course of this month, actually in the course of 2 months, because we also work in photographs.
Цей прапор, це, власне, колаж.
It's a collage of the hands
Канадійців, виключно.
of those Canadians.
Канада не славиться своєю.
Just a second. And this is the collage made out of hands of the visitors to the exhibition, including Suzanne, the president of CNE, and Randy, your hands are oh, good luck. You haven't found that. You can find it. So yes, so this is a collage of the visitors' hands. Glasses as well. So whoever was here before and had an opportunity, their hands captured, Daria in a maximum way use those images in her file.
Це, власне, такий мій жест подяки канадійцям за те, що за підтримку.
This is my way of saying thank you to Canada for your support.
So we're going to pull away the podium here because we've got a rather large piece to reveal, and Mykola can describe what that large piece consists of as we reveal it.
And in the meantime, I will tell you a little bit about the process of creation. As Daria had tried many various versions of the flag, but one thing she said to me that she couldn't give up is the differences between the hands, from young to old, from different skin colors, different male hands with beautiful long nails there as well. So she said to me, you know, Canadian society is so diverse that I really want to show that. And therefore, she did not color it through into red. She said, in Canada, a mood is to remain who you are and really celebrate your differences. And you just become Canadian by believing in this country. So I really like that. Okay, so here is the big revelation of a large body of work that Mykola's been working. It's a heavy painting, almost 4 years.
Ready
From the emotions. Before we proceed to unveiling it, I'll say to you the following. Every morning, started from checking the news. Like many of you, we call and we check if everybody's alive. I personally snap the screenshots of my dad every phone call because I don't know if it's the last one. It's very hard to live through this experience. And it's very touching that you're here all today. It helps us, this helps us to deal with this here in Canada because we're not home. So when this came, this photograph flew around the world. And Mykola saw in this image, an image of Ukraine. And he couldn't just take it, he had to do something. So he created this work. Mykola saw in this image Ukraine bleeding out, carried out by angels. He's given it some innocence. He's throwing roses, just like Botticelli's Spring. But just like in Taras Shevchenko's painting Katerina, Katerina's wreath is down, and Katerina's down. So Mykola was touched by the fact that the whole world was praying for Ukraine at that moment. He felt that that was a very important moment, awakening. And he calls this painting Mykola Madonna, Pray for Ukraine.
So I think now's the time for you to have the opportunity to meander a boat and if you'd like to talk with Mykola or Daria and have a look at the other pieces. If you've not had the opportunity to do so before the program started, you can answer questions. I think we finish up in about 15 minutes, but there's still time for you to have refreshments and to have a bit of discussion. Thank you for your support and your attendance, and very much appreciated.
Before anything gets unplugged, can we hear the recording?